look up above. We're gonna learn about looking up above today. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carrie. This is where I talk about knitting, my tips, my tricks, my opinions, my preferences, my experiences, my experiments, all the good things. All the good things of making pretty things with pretty string. Well, one of the most important things about knitting, one of the most important skills you can have is how to actually read your knitting, to look at what you're doing and go, that's the row where I did my decreases. That's the last row of my ribbing. That's where my cable cross is. And it's a skill that, quite frankly, eluded me for years. For years of knitting, I was terrible at being able to identify what row I did what actions. But then I learned a secret. One of the keys to being able to read your knit, which is a simple rule: look up above. Yes, today I'm going to share with you what this means and how this can demystify figuring out all sorts of things when you're trying to read your knitting. So hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and learn the secret to look up above when it comes to knitting. As always, before we jump into all the great information ahead of us, down in the description box you will find a list of timestamps that will take you to various parts of the video. I always hope that you'll watch through the whole video at least one time, because you just never know what neat trick or funny moment might exist, but sometimes you gotta get to something specific. Also down in the description box, you will find a list of material and resources related to today's video. Some of these will have clearly marked affiliate links. If you click on one, it will take you to a shopping website. And if you make a purchase, I might then earn a small commission, which helps support my channel so that I have materials for review, materials for demonstration, upgrade equipment, that sort of thing. So if you utilize one of my affiliate links, thank you so much. It's so greatly appreciated. And if not, that's cool too. Just so glad you're here watching a video today. All right, plugs are done. FTC regulations are met. Let's get on with things. Okay, so look up above. What does this mean? Frankly, it's kind of easier to demonstrate in a lot of ways than to explain, but I'm going to try to give you a 1,000-foot level first, and then we'll get into some specific situations where this basic guideline to reading your knitting exists. So here we got a little swatch that I have been working on. Right here you can see my working yarn is to my right side, and this is stockinette stitch, which means that I just completed a row of purl stitches. Now, there's something about knitting that we talk about stitches, purl, knit as nouns, and a concept I'm going to just throw out to you. And if it's helpful for you, as it is for me, great. If it's a concept that makes no sense to you, don't worry about it. But a concept that really has helped me understand a lot of this stuff is a knit and a purl, even though we talk about them as nouns, you know, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, really what we're describing is an action. We are knitting into stitches or we are purling into stitches. So what that means is you create a new row of stitches, and what you have done to create this new row of stitches, whether it's performing knit stitches or performing purl stitches, it affects the row below. So you might look at something in knitting, right? A really clear marker, for example, a decrease. It's very obvious in knitting to recognize a decrease because you see the two stitches overlapping one another and forming one column of stitches where there used to be two columns of stitches, right? But those two stitches that are decreased together, those two stitches existed before the decrease row. The decrease row that joined those two stitches together exists above it. So yeah, it can be a little confusing to explain all this, and if you're still going, Carrie, I don't get it, that's cool. That's cool. We are going to start looking at some specific examples of how this look up above rule of thumb works so that you can start training your eye and your mind to recognize what's happening with your knitting as you're working. Real life scenario, right? Because I think this concept of look up above is easiest to understand when you are looking at sort of practical real life knitting situations. So I'm going to use a swatch. But this will simulate real life, okay? Just pretend this little swatch is a sweater. And I put it to the side for a couple of days and I went, do, life is happening, life is happening, life is happening. And I come back to my swatch. And when I come back to it, I'm like, oh, crumb. I forgot where I am in my work. I lost my piece of paper where I was putting down hash marks. I can't find it. Where am I in my work? Do I still need to be working stockinette, or am I supposed to start decrease rounds? I'm not sure. Well, the thing you can always do as a knitter is to count your rows, right? And figure out where you are in your place. And the nice thing when you have a pattern where you start off with some ribbing first is you don't have to count up from the very bottom of your work and up. You can like just go, well, I can just count my stockinette rows, right? The question is, where did you start knitting your stockinette? That's the question. And the answer might seem really obvious because if you look here, right, you got your column of stockinette stitches basically that run up, and it's kind of impossible to tell where the ribbing ends and the stockinette begins because it's stockinette all the way down. It's turtles all the way down, it's stockinette all the way down. So you go to your purl column in your ribbing and you're like, well, right there, those are my purl bumps, my last purl bumps. Where those purl bumps are must be my last row of ribbing, right? Wrong. I got this wrong for years and had such a hard time sometimes being able to see what was going on with my knitting because that purl bump is the last stitch that I purled into while I was doing my last row of ribbing. So what I need to do is look up above to the stitch above the purl bump, and that is the last row where you did purling in purl columns in order to create your ribbing. And it's easy for me to say, but I'm going to prove it to you right now. All right, so we got our stockinette. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just knit some ribbing to start off with. And it's 4x4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to do my purl stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. One too few purls. It's okay, just tink back. There we go. Now that works. Okay, so here I am, and I've done a couple of rows of ribbing, and I'm gonna do my last row of ribbing now. Okay, so it's my last row of ribbing, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to mark. So these stitches up here on the cable right now, these newly formed stitches, is my last row of ribbing. So I'm gonna put a stitch marker on one of the stitches where I performed a purl to mark that this is the last row of my ribbing. Now we're gonna go ahead and we're going to just knit some stockinette. And then we will read where my last row of ribbing is. This, by the way, is how I work patterns without utilizing any kind of row counter or doing hash marks or anything like that. I just utilize stitch markers to mark out, you know, either the end of a repeat or the end of every so many rows, whatever makes sense. I use stitch markers to help keep track of my work. You know, sometimes things happen though, and you forget to put in your stitch marker, or you forget to switch over your row counter, you forget to write down your hash mark, you forget to do the thing that helps you keep track of your work. And that's why it's important to be able to look at your work, read it, and identify where you did whatever action was needed for your pattern so that you can figure out where you are. There's no substitution for being able to read your work. So let's take a look at where my stitch marker is. It's not here on the purl bump, right? It's not there on that purl bump, is it? Nope. My stitch marker, where I put my last row of ribbing, is here on the stitch above. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows of stockinette. And this stitch that I marked, that is a stitch that was created while I was purling. Even though it looks like a knit stitch, it is a stitch that was created while purling. And why is that? It comes back to a basic rule of knitting, this is like knitting physics here. What you do while creating a new row of stitches in knitting is expressed in the row below. So if you're purling while creating a new row of stitches, it's the row below that's going to be looking like a purl stitch. Let's say we wanted to figure out where our first row of ribbing was down here. Now I didn't mark this, but I can figure it out because if this is the first purl bump in what looks like my ribbing, that means I created that on the row above it because the rule always holds. So this second purl bump up, that's my first row of ribbing. This is my last row of stockinette. So if I were to count between my rows of ribbing, here's my row of ribbing right there. Here's my last row of my first ribbing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this 8. Because that purl bump, that first purl bump in my ribbing was created when I did my last row of stockinette. Now, this isn't just true for ribbing. This is true for all sorts of situations. And so let's take a look at some more scenarios so we can really set this in our head and really understand what's going on in very common situations, like, for example, increases and decreases. I'm just knitting along, and let's say my pattern says that I need to have, do a decrease row, and then do a decrease row every 3 rows. So I've just been knitting along, watching some TV, having a good time, and realize I've kind of lost track where I am. And I realize, oh, wait, am I at my next decrease row or not? Am I? Well, let's look at the knitting, shall we? As we do. Right here, I can clearly see that is a left-leaning decrease right there, okay? So that's my decrease. And if I were to count 1, 2, and I was supposed to decrease every 3rd row, I would think that I would now be on my next decrease row. And that would be a big mistake. Because this, where those 2 stitches came together, is not my decrease row. No. Again, you have to look above. It's the row above. That's my decrease row. And again, this is something I did. This is a mistake I made years ago with a project that I've never finished because I got so frustrated. And it was really a matter of the fact that I was looking, and this is such a common mistake, I was looking at these 2 stitches decreased together and going, well, that's my decrease row, and I was wrong. And I kept going, why is this pattern not working the way? And it was totally my fault because I didn't know to look above. But I'm going to show it to you again so that you can see for yourself how this works. So I'm going to just do 1, 2, slip as if to knit, slip as if to knit, knit those 2 stitches together for a left-leaning decrease. And do my right-leaning decrease. And this time I'm going to mark my decrease row so that you can see where that lands. Although you can already tell right now, right? Like I just did my decrease row and you can see there's the 2 stitches I decreased together. Here's the new stitch that I created that's up on my cable. So this is my decrease row, even though the 2 stitches that were decreased together is on the row below. But let's mark it and knit a couple of rows so you can just really see how it looks. By the way, if you're hearing rain, that is because it's raining outside right now in LA. We've had so much rain lately. So let's look. I mean, you can see right here, right? Those are the 2 stitches that I decreased away. It's a left-leaning decrease, but my marker is on the row above it, and that's because it's the row above that I did the action of decreasing. And the expression of those 2 decreases happens on the row below. I mean, this is so consistent through knitting. Same thing on this side. Here's the 2 stitches that I decreased together, but I know from the marker, it's the row above that I did the decrease. This is like one of those things where it's like, once you get it in your head, it's like, okay, the thought process. Here are the 2, 3, how many ever stitches are decreased together? Here are the stitches that were decreased together, the 2 columns of stitches that became 1. This is the point where those 2 columns became 1. I gotta look above, and that's where I actually performed the action. Because that's what we're looking at. That's what knitting patterns are telling you. Like row 1, do these actions, right? But those actions get expressed in the row below. But when it comes to being able to read our work, we need to understand where we did the actions, not where those actions are expressed. All right? And I showed you this with decreases. The same thing is true with increases. No matter what kind of increase that you do, wherever it looks like the increases, look to the row above. All right, so cables is one of the things I think that can be trickiest to figure out what row you did the cross on. Because it's very obvious where a set of stitches have overlapped one another, usually. But again, if we think about this concept of look above, where the stitches cross in the fabric isn't where the action actually occurred. Why? Because in knitting, the actions that you perform while creating those new sets of stitches get expressed in the row below. And the same is true with cabling. So let's just do a cable real quick and we'll see how this works. I've got my cable needle here because frankly, I'm not good with cabling without a cable needle. That is not my strength. Not with these sorts of cables. German twist cables, yes, those, no problem. All right, so here I am, and I'm going to do my cable cross. I'm doing a 4x4 left cable cross. I've got my cable needle here. Just FYI, this is my favorite type of cable needle to use. This is a fishhook style cable needle. And what you do is you take the stitches off with the short end. So 1, 2, 3, 4. This is gonna be a left leaning cross. So I'm gonna take this and then I bend it around like this so that, and I'll hold that to the front. And then I'm gonna knit the next 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then I just take the stitches and I bring them to the tip of the long end, drop my needle there, and I will just work these stitches off of my cable needle here. 1, 2, 3, oops, 3, 4, okay, put that down. And now I'm ready to knit. So that was my cable cross. I'm going to mark the row where I just did the cable cross. So here, right there, that stitch right there, I'm gonna mark basically the first stitch of where the cable cross happened, and I'm going to mark the last stitch of where that cable cross happened with my blue marker. So that's all marked. I am now going to just knit some of continuing on in pattern, where above the cable cross, I'm going to be working some stockinette, and we'll come back and we'll take a look at where we can identify where we did the cable cross. Done a couple of rows since the cable cross, so let's take a look and identify what row the cable cross occurred on. We look here. Here is where my stitch marker is, so that's where I did the cross. And let's look at that and where it is. I always think it's easier actually to look on the other side, the last part of the cross, to see this. Because if you look, here's where I did the cable cross, right? That's marked. If I look at this stitch right here, it's crossing over top the stitch underneath, right? So that's the stitch that got crossed, but I did the crossing on this row, and I know this by the marker. So when I see a stitch coming over the top of that, like that in the cable cross, I know it's the row above where this marker is. I know it's this row above where I did the cable cross. Something else too, just quick FYI. Whenever you do a cable cross, Patty Lyons talks about this, is if you lift the fabric, there's kind of a hole here that kind of develops. If I take my cable needle and I put it through that hole right there, that's where the cross is, right? So if I look, it's coming underneath this row. So if I look to the row above, that's where the cable cross is. Not where it's coming over, like that stitch right there is where the cable needle is underneath. That's the stitch that crossed over, but you did the cable crossing up here on the row above. So the row above is where the cable cross is in your pattern or on your chart. So yes, there it is, look above. This idea, this thought process was one that when I really got it solidified in my head was a real game changer for me in the sense of being able to really look at my work, read it, understand where I was in the pattern, where I was in the project. If I walked away from it for months, sometimes years on end, be able to come back to it and go, wait a minute, let me look at this. I can identify these markers, these aspects in the work, and I can suss out where I am in the pattern, what row I'm on, what stitch I'm on, etc., etc. But yeah, it's such a simple concept. It seems like there must be more to it, but there's really not. It's just like, look above. Now I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Do you have any questions for me? Is this something that you had already figured out on your own? Is this something in knitting that you struggled with, like I did for years, understanding like when I'm looking at a decrease, those two stitches crossed over isn't the decrease row. I'd love to hear about it down in the comments below. Also, if you have any tips or tricks in terms of being able to read your work, I'd love to hear about it and share that information back and forth, because as always, I like to think I know everything, but I don't. I don't know everything. And one of the great things about having an online, vibrant knitting community is we all get to learn from one another. I hope you enjoyed today's video and you got some useful information out of it. If so, please make sure to hit the thumbs up and share it with your other knitting friends. Liking videos, sharing videos, commenting on videos are all great ways to let YouTube know that this is a space worth checking out, and it really does help support and grow my channel. Also, if you have not already, please make sure to hit subscribe and the notification bell. And even if you thought I am subscribed to your channel, no reason not to just go ahead and double check. Make sure subscribe is hit, because it happens to me all the time. I think, oh, I love this channel. They're always popping up in my feed. I must be subscribed. And then I'm not. So just double check. Make sure you're still subscribed to my channel. Subscribing my channel is a great free way, again, to support what it is I'm doing here. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you may be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye. So right here you can see that my working... all right. Oh. I'm going to just go ahead and mark that for future reference, okay? I just pulled my needle out. Shoot, I hate when I do that. Okay, how's your filming going so far? Well, the camera almost fell over and the lens almost broke. I caught it. It was like Matrix style, me going, no, 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 no. Got it. Oh, by the way, if you'd like to keep watching videos from me, at the end, right now, probably about now, a couple of video suggestions are popping up. If you'd like to click on one, you can. If you're like, gotta get on my day, gotcha. But you still have one more chance to hit subscribe. Little picture of me in the corner, just click it, and you'll be able to subscribe to my channel. Okay, that's it. Plugs are really done this time. See ya next time.